2/3 of the senators present not having voted guilty. The Senate judges that the respondent, Donald John Trump, former President of the United States, is not guilty as charged in the article of impeachment.
The U.S. Senate acquits Donald Trump of inciting the mob that stormed the U.S. Capitol last month. What does it mean for his political future and beyond? Hello, I'm Arnold Knight, and this is The Heat. The result was never really in any doubt. In the end, 7 Republicans joined with the Democrats to convict the former U.S. president by a 57-43 vote. But that was far from the 2/3 threshold required, and while no witnesses appeared in person, dramatic new video revealed just how perilously close the violent mob came to succeeding in its alleged attempt to prevent the peaceful transfer of power. Let's get straight to our panel. Steve Chaggaris is the political editor for Al Jazeera Online. Joel Rubin is a Democratic strategist and former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State during the Obama administration. Amy Holmes is a columnist for the Swiss weekly Die Weltwoche and a writer for HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher. And Joseph Williams is the senior news editor for U.S. News and World Report. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Joseph Williams, let me start with you, and let's look at what's been happening over the past few days. Donald Trump, of course, has been impeached twice. He's the only president to have been impeached twice. He's been acquitted twice as well. In this latest trial, he was accused of incitement. What do you make of the proceedings of the last few days, the prosecution's case, and, of course, the response from Trump's lawyers?
Well, the prosecution's case led by Jamie Raskin is very methodical, very thorough, I thought, in observing it. The new evidence, the new video evidence that they had was almost shocking to realize how close the mob had come to actually getting their hands on some lawmakers. I mean, the most striking images that I have from the past couple of days of the trial was of Mitt Romney getting tapped on the shoulder by a police officer and redirected and starting sprinting around the corner, and then Chuck Schumer heading up a ramp and then reversing course once he realized that the mob was outside of the entrance that he was headed towards. So it was unnerving to realize how close the democracy had come to destruction. And the impeachment managers very much made that case, very much made it visceral. There were a lot of senators that were riveted during that testimony. However, the impeachment managers were no match for the fact that this almost was predetermined, and Trump's lawyers didn't really have to make much of a case. They just kind of got up there and put forward some half-truths and some misdirection, and it worked because the outcome was never in doubt. So while Trump again escaped impeachment and consequences for this really severe action, the beat goes on as far as the Republican Party is concerned, in that they did not feel he was the person who should be held responsible, right. And that's going to enter into another conflict in the Republican Party.
Joseph, as you say, the outcome was predetermined. It was a foregone conclusion. One needs a 2/3 majority in the Senate, in the United States Senate, for conviction. The Democrats got 7 Republicans to join them. But despite that loss, the Democrat impeachment manager, whom you mentioned a moment ago, he claimed victory of a sort. Let's listen to what he had to say.
I think it was a dramatic success in historical terms. It was the largest impeachment conviction vote in U.S. history. It was by far the most bipartisan majority that's ever assembled in the Senate to convict a president, which has traditionally been a kind of partisan thing in American history.
So, Joseph, we know that this is a political process. It's not a legal process as such. So was it a political win for the Democrats?
Well, in real terms, not particularly. I mean, there was a lot of talk that the impeachment managers were playing towards the history books. Even knowing it was a predetermined outcome, they went ahead and put forward a steadfast case because they wanted history to record the fact that they tried to hold Donald Trump accountable. They are also playing towards the American public, trying to let them know what the Republican Party stands for in the fact that this overwhelming evidence, the shocking evidence were presented, and Republicans nonetheless still voted to acquit on a technicality. And Raskin, his statement there was kind of like putting a positive spin on a loss. I mean, yes, they beat the point spread, but in getting 7 senators where before they only had 1, But it's a bitter pill for them to swallow, knowing that they had come so close and with so much evidence, and they still could not move the Republican Party, even though that party, members of that party, were members targeted by the mob.
Amy Holmes, the leader of the opposition Republicans in the United States Senate, Mitch McConnell, he voted to acquit the president, but then immediately after that vote, he slammed the president in a speech that he made in a short address. Here he is. Let's listen to part of it.
Former President Trump's actions preceded the riot were a disgraceful dereliction of duty. The people who stormed this building believed they were acting on the wishes and instructions of their president. If President Trump were still in office, I would have carefully considered whether the House managers proved their specific charge. President Trump is still liable for everything he did while he was in office as an ordinary citizen, unless the statute of limitations is run, still liable for everything he did while he was in office. Didn't get away with anything yet.
So, Amy, how does one explain that? On the one hand, McConnell is very harsh in his criticism of the president there, but he voted to acquit.
Well, the constitutionality of impeaching a former president is not a mere technicality. It's a hotly debated dispute between constitutional scholars, of which I am not. But when I listened to Senator McConnell, I thought, boy, Mitch McConnell really hates Donald Trump. And I think part of the reason for that is not just the past 4 years and all of the, division and chaos and controversy that Donald Trump created, but the very real and immediate fact that Donald Trump, many people believe, lost Mitch McConnell and Republicans the majority in the Senate with those 2 Georgia runoff races. When Donald Trump went down to Georgia to campaign right before that January 5th, special election, I watched that rally, and it was all me, poor me, the election, relitigating the election. It was not about Loeffler or Perdue, the 2 Republican candidates that were in fact running for the United States Senate, and the practical consequence is that Mitch McConnell is no longer majority leader. We are now discussing Democrats trying to blow up the Senate and have it basically turn into the House, where legislation can pass with a simple majority, 51 votes. And I think Mitch McConnell feels that very keenly. And I have to say, it was very eyebrow-raising to me that while he didn't think impeachment was the appropriate venue, he was practically begging the criminal and civil courts to go after Donald Trump. So clearly, Mitch McConnell wants to see the back of this guy, and I would suspect that they've also done some of their own internal polling. They've also done their own focus groups, and they think that Donald Trump is not good for the brand. And Nikki Haley, I'll just add one more thing. Nikki Haley, right on the eve of that impeachment vote, she came out. And remember, this is a former Trump administration official, the ambassador to the UN, and expected to run for president just 4 years from now. She came out and, slammed President Trump. So she's making the calculation that being in opposition to Trump is more politically advantageous, and probably, it's also a matter of principle as well, but more politically advantageous than going down with a Trump sinking ship.
Joel, Rubin, let's look at some of the political consequences of the last few days' events for the Democrat Party. Well, not just for the Democrat Party, but for President Biden as well. He has got some pretty high priority items on his agenda. The main one of which, of course, is to help the American people. He needs to sign that rescue package to help millions of Americans who are out of work or underemployed right now. He needs to help businesses that are threatened with closure. And one of the first things he said in his inaugural speech was the need for unity. But isn't this impeachment and the trial going to hinder his effort to get that unity, to get his program through?
Well, and I think that, first of all, regarding Mitch McConnell, who will be key to this unity, we just saw over the weekend how disingenuous of a politician he really is. A day late and a dollar short. You can't criticize Donald Trump the way he did and vote to acquit on a technicality. And it is a technicality because just days before, the Senate voted that it was constitutional to have this trial. So he's all over the place. And I think for Joe Biden, that means that he really has to rely on the Democratic majority that Donald Trump, as Amy rightly said, Donald Trump provided to the American people. So I think we're going to see a lot of moves to try to move bills forward, like the COVID relief bill, that are popular with the majority of the American people, even if they're not popular with the Republican caucus, because we just saw the Republican caucus cover its eyes about the insurrection at the Capitol, where they personally were on the target list of being killed, where Mike Pence was on the target list, and they turned a blind eye to it. So it's really a lost cause right now dealing with this Republican caucus. And I think if we can get several Republicans to join still say Vice President, but President Biden, because now he gets to really start in earnest, then we'll see a win. But I don't think relying on Mitch McConnell or Kevin McCarthy, the House leader, is going to do much good to Joe Biden.
Steve Chaggaris, within the Republican Party, President Trump's rating remains relatively high. He issued a statement after the verdict was announced. He called the trial a witch hunt. But then we heard from one of his close allies in the Republican Party, the U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham. This is what Lindsey Graham said.
I've been asked by a lot of people, Chris, calm President Trump down. Talk to him, get him to calm down. Sometimes he does and sometimes he doesn't. But to my Republican colleagues, this is a two-way street. 90% of the Republican Party thought this impeachment was a partisan exercise. That's what I thought. He is out of office. And so to the Republican Party, if you want to win and stop a socialist agenda, we need to work with President Trump. We can't do it without him. And to you, President Trump, you need to build the Republican Party stronger. I'm into winning. And if you want to get something off your chest, fine, but I'm into winning.
So, Steve, listening to Lindsey Graham there, does that tell us that President Trump still holds a lot of influence and power in the Republican Party, despite what happened in the U.S. Senate in the past few days?
Yeah, it does. But really, by default, what it means is that Republican voters really have most of the power in the Republican Party right now. And if Republican voters continue to say, in which they do overwhelmingly, that they approve of Donald Trump, then most Republicans are going to listen to that. What's interesting is to see what Mitch McConnell did on Saturday, which is really sort of deviate from that significantly, not only throw Donald Trump under the bus, but basically signal that it's time for the party to move away from Donald Trump. He's clearly making a calculation that it's not about just playing to the Republican base and the serious Trump supporters in the Republican Party, but it's about actually trying to grow their base. If they want to win back the Senate, they're going to need to nominate candidates who aren't just pro-Trump candidates, but people who can speak to a broader group of folks, especially in battleground states. He's seen, as Amy mentioned, what happened in Georgia, a battleground state, putting two candidates up there that aren't speaking to independents, that aren't speaking to potential Democrats who might want to vote for a Republican. And so, yes, Lindsey Graham's on board because 80 to 90% of the Republican base is on board with Donald Trump. But over the course of the next year or two, Mitch McConnell's making a calculation that perhaps Donald Trump's influence is going to wane over time. He's not going to be on Twitter. He's not going to have as big of a soapbox. Plus, there are a lot of other legal issues that Donald Trump's going to have to deal with over the next year or two. And so McConnell's making a calculation that Trump, A, might not be as powerful, and B, that the party needs to move forward with candidates who are electable in the general election.
Amy, what are your thoughts on that? Will President Trump begin to lose his support in a year's time? As Steve just pointed out, he's lost his big soapbox, Twitter, but we also know that there's another big social media platform, Parler, which is now back online. He may be able to use that.
Well, I am not so arrogant as to try to predict the future a year from now. But if Donald Trump is mired in legal controversies, again, he's in the headlines. I think it's interesting that, Joel kind of had a Freudian slip there about calling Joe Biden vice president, because if you were watching this impeachment trial,
well,
you would
it worked for him then.
Trump is still president, and that was even in the House Articles of Impeachment. The president shall be convicted and removed. And Axios reported that the Joe Biden White House, the actual president who was inaugurated last month, they wanted this trial over and done, move on, get on with the Biden agenda. So interestingly enough, at least in among the party elites, the swamp, there is some unity about trying to get past this obsession with Donald Trump and to try to focus on the future agenda. I think the big question for Republicans moving forward, can they get Donald Trump to, get with the program, be on side with their team, as Lindsey Graham was saying, and lead Republican candidates to victory in the midterms for Republicans to regain the House and even possibly the United States Senate? Or is he going to act as a spoiler, throw tantrums, and threaten a third party, even though he seemed to have backed down from that? Threaten a third party. He's not on Twitter, he's not on social media, but he could certainly get his message out in other ways. And the Republican Party will also need to decide where they are when it comes to their agenda. That we saw 74 million people turn out to vote for President Trump after these 4 years. He gained 12 million voters. Republicans want to hang on to those voters. How do they do that? Can they do that without that big personality at the top of the ticket who's, as we know, is both a plus and a minus? And do they become a party that is more focused on the working class? Because we saw that working class voters are shifting to the Republican Party. Do they become more populist, less U.S. Chamber of Commerce, more working class guy? These are the questions I think Republicans need to answer.
This is a mirage, and I have to say it. I mean, Donald Trump is the biggest historic loser we've had since World War II. He lost the House, he lost the Senate, he lost the White House, he was impeached twice, let alone the fact that he inspired an insurrection and had the worst economy since 1946 on his watch. I have no idea why people like Lindsey Graham, other than the fact that he's from South Carolina, where he has to say this, I have no idea why he thinks Donald Trump is somehow a winner for their ticket. Joe Biden, we had 81 million votes. It was historic, the most ever in a presidential election. And people in the suburbs are fleeing to Joe Biden, not because of some swampy elite, but because actually Democrats have the policies and the personality that Americans want running this country. Donald Trump is a failure. And I think for Republicans, they have to actually internalize, they have to, wait, let me finish.
One moment,
they have to internalize the fact that they lost multiple times under Donald Trump, and they have not yet done that at their own peril.
Okay, Amy, very quickly a response.
You need to look also at how voters split their tickets. So yes, Donald Trump did drive a lot of suburban voters to Joe Biden.
But they didn't win the House or the Senate.
Republicans did very well in the House, and now the Democrats have
they did not win the House. The House was won by Democrats. I don't understand the math.
I think Jonathan Turley, the George Washington law professor, he said it well when it comes to this impeachment. He said that it hardened the minds of many and changed the minds of few. And I think that was part of
That's not true.
Calculation.
That's not true. There were 7 Republicans in the Senate. There were 7 Republicans in the Senate who voted to convict.
Very few
That's not
people
true at all.
made minds about this impeachment through the course of it.
All right, I'm going to move on. Steve, I know you want to say something. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, there's one factor that I think people are missing out on as well, which is over the next 2 years, this isn't just going to be about Donald Trump and the Republican Party. It's also going to be likely a referendum on what Democrats and Joe Biden are going to do over the next 2 years. And if Joe Biden is successful in putting forth what he's proposed, then perhaps the views of Democrats are going to be enhanced going into the midterms. If not, if he can't make good on his promises, there's no question Republicans will be more united against Joe Biden at that point, and perhaps the Republicans benefit from that next year.
Right. Joseph Williams, while this political battle continues, one of the things, of course, that a lot of people will be looking at very closely is how did this happen? How did this take place on January 6th? I mean, here we have a country which has 17 intelligence agencies with a combined budget that's probably bigger than the GDP of many, many countries, yet they missed this completely. In fact, we just heard that the leader of the Democrats in the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, is planning some kind of a commission of inquiry into this. We don't know how big this inquiry is going to be, whether it's going to be modeled along the lines of the 9/11 inquiry or anything like that. But how did this happen? Was this a big intelligence failure?
Well, I tend to think not, because the information was out there. The information was out there in plain sight. All they had to do was log on to Twitter, log on to any right-wing website, right-wing chat room, and it was clear. I mean, I knew that there was going to be some bad mojo happening on January 6th, and I'm just a reporter, and I knew, I got the sense that this was going to be really dangerous. So did many people who I talked to. I think it was willful neglect. I think that it was, I did a story on this and talked about how when there are white nationalist groups that are fomenting violence, they tend to be taken far less seriously than Black Lives Matter protests or any other kind of protest. And look, let's be clear about two things. The first is that President Donald Trump was president on the day that the riot happened, and that is why his name is on the impeachment files as president, because it happened on his watch. Mitch McConnell, number two, delayed that trial. They still would have put him on trial when he was still president, except Mitch McConnell, he adjourned the Senate for a couple of weeks, and then he comes back after Joe Biden has been elected, setting up the perfect argument for why he should not be convicted and why this is a technical defeat for the Democrats. And let's be clear about a third thing. Lindsey Graham came to U.S. News & World Report. We had a roundtable interview with him in 2016. He repeatedly bashed Donald Trump. He famously said that if the Republican Party elects Donald Trump, they will get destroyed and they will deserve it. And after the administration of President Donald Trump, where so much bad stuff happened, and even though they drove new voters, I don't think it's got any kind of staying power. And as to why President Trump is still popular, I have very many opinions about that. And I think one of them has to do with the fact that he succeeded a president who was very successful and who was the first black president in the history of the republic.
Amy, President Trump, former President Trump, still faces criminal charges in many jurisdictions, in New York for one. In Georgia, they're looking at some kind of charge against him there. Some of these investigations even predate his time as president. I mean, could we still see him in a lot of legal trouble?
I believe so. And, you know, this impeachment just gives him another bullet point on those emails that his team will be sending out to send him money to try to fight the Democrats that, you know, as he puts it, are on a witch hunt and, you know, just cannot and will not let it go. But I don't think that that's necessarily good for our country. And I don't think that we should be criminalizing political disputes and differences. If Donald Trump did, in fact, indeed break the law, certainly
tax evasion.
Well,
It's not a Theodore difference. It's illegal behavior.
Joel, let me
Insurance fraud, mortgage fraud.
One moment, Joe.
He should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. But to the extent that these prosecutions are politically motivated, and in some cases they are, I don't think that that's good for the country. But once again, who are we talking about? We're talking about the former president and not the current one. And we know that the current administration would prefer that we talk about Joe Biden.
Okay, Joel?
Yeah, well, the current administration is already surpassing the goals that Joe Biden laid out for 100 million vaccines in the first 100 days. We're seeing legitimate mask mandates going into effect, and the American people having confidence now that we have a government that actually cares about our health. We're renewed back on the world stage. We're seeing an economic package going forward, and I want to remark on this because I think it's critical. One of the lessons learned for Democrats from 2009, the meltdown, was that Republicans blocked successive bills for a big relief package that hindered the economic recovery and hurt Barack Obama. Remember that famous line of Mitch McConnell, "I want to make Barack Obama a one-term president." So we have that in our muscle memory. Joe Biden's not going to fall for that trap again. He's going to push forward with a bill, and if it's only Democrats that vote for it, fine. So be it, because he wants to make sure the country succeeds, and he will get judged on that record, but he'll get judged on his record, not on Mitch McConnell's definition of what his record should be.
All right, Steve, I want to move on to some of the challenges that President Biden faces right now. Let's talk about the current president. You know, some of the challenges, climate change for one, Joel just mentioned COVID-19, that's another, immigration, criminal justice reform, infrastructure. And of course, one of his biggest challenges is how to get that stimulus bill through Congress right now. What is the status of that bill right now? Because, as I said, there are millions of people out of work, businesses facing closure. What happens to that bill now?
Well, it's working its way through the House committees right now, and then it's likely to pass the House, probably without much incident, in the next couple of weeks. And then it heads over to the Senate, where I think, depending on what the House puts in their bill, it could run into some problems. Keep in mind, it's a 50-50 Senate, so you lose any Democrats on this thing, and they're in trouble in terms of getting it passed. And one of the hang-ups is going to be this idea that there needs to be a $15 federal minimum wage put into the bill. The House looks like it's going to put that in and push it through, and if it gets to the Senate, you've got at least two Democrats, Joe Manchin of West Virginia and Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona, who both said publicly, we will not vote for a bill that has a $15 minimum wage in it, and the Democrats are stuck at that point, and so they're going to have to figure out how to keep all 50 Democrats together in the Senate in order to get that thing done. So that's a challenge for them. We'll see how they figure it out. They're going to try to get it figured out by March 14th, which is a deadline that they've set.
Joseph, how big a challenge, political challenge, is this for President Biden? Because a lot of people look at Congress right now. They look at government in the United States and say, look, the Democrats have the House of Representatives, they have the U.S. Senate, and they have the White House. What's the holdup?
Well, the holdup is that the difference in character between, or difference in nature, I should say, between the two parties. Republicans are very much disciplined. Democrats try to reach consensus, and that is the two biggest distinctions between the two parties. If Mitch McConnell had put this bill on the floor, there would be no question all the Republican votes, or nearly all the Republican votes, save for three in the middle, would line up behind it. Democrats, you kind of have to woo, you kind of have to collect, you have to hear all points of view, and all points of view have to be considered before a bill gets to the floor. That, to me, is the biggest hangup, and the fact that Republicans still have enough power to do to block it, to do some mischief to the bill, if you will, and to really take it to Joe Biden and make it as difficult as they can for these things to pass. It's in their best interest to do that. They have voters they want to look after. They have constituencies that don't like this sort of thing. And it's going to be very difficult any way you slice it because of those dynamics. It's even harder for Nancy Pelosi because she has to get all of the Democrats in line. And it's been famously said that trying to unify Democrats is like trying to herd cats.
You know, Amy, you remember during the Obama administration, the Republicans were called, very often they were called the party of no. Are we going to see that again?
Well, I would add that what is the holdup with ramming through legislation on a party line vote? It's called the democratic process, and it is the structure of the Senate so far. That in the Senate, as Chuck Schumer famously said when I worked for the Senate Majority Leader Bill Frist and George Bush was president, that Chuck Schumer said over and over that the Senate is a cooling saucer.
Right.
That's the place where legislation is supposed to build bipartisan support.
Right. Amy, sorry, I gotta ask you something. You know, I get your point that Amy, I get your point that this is a slow process. But there are people who have no jobs right now, who can't put food on the table, who can't pay their rents, who can't buy gas or anything like that.
It would seem that the solution, as was just mentioned, is not having the $15 minimum wage element in the COVID bill, since it's already opposed by 2 Democrats, and take that out and be able to pass this COVID relief bill. So you actually don't even need Republicans to be able to make that fix and get the 50+1 vote that you need to be able to pass. And I actually think you would get Republicans on board as well if you took out the minimum wage deal. But this idea that Democrats are, you know, this kumbaya party that's only about consultation and compromise, we've seen precisely the opposite of that. And in fact, with the impeachment, Senator McConnell said, hey, Republicans, vote your conscience, go your way on this. And he didn't try to impose some sort of top-down authoritarian party discipline.
All right, Joel, very quickly, I got 10 seconds. Your response to that.
Well, the Democrats were going to always try to get Republicans on board, but Democratic unity is at a peak right now. I've never seen so much unity get something done for the American people, and that's, I think, what we're going to see in the coming days.
Okay, that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to everyone for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.